Hi everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion on the critical topic of sustainable IT framework. To set up the context, let me tell you that we are talking about the sustainable IT framework developed by Green Computing Foundation, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting environmentally responsible practices within the world of information technology. I am Dr. Surabhi, Executive Director of Green Computing Foundation, and I am your host and moderator for today's discussion. We have gathered a distinguished group of experts to share their insights and perspectives. Without further ado, let's welcome our esteemed panelists. To start with, we have Dr. Niladri Chaudhary, CEO of Excellentro and President of Green Computing Foundation. Next, we have Naresh Chaudhary, Vice President of Infosys and Advisory Board Member of Green Computing Foundation. We have Sanjay Singh, DevSecOps Head at Games 24/7 and Advisory Board Member at Green Computing Foundation. We have Matt Williams joining from United States. Matt is an expert in the field of cloud, DevOps, and sustainable IT. He is also an advisory board member at Green Computing Foundation. And last but not the least, we have Manoj Garg, the winner of DevOps Excellence Award and DevOps COE lead at NatWest Group. I welcome all the panelists in today's show. To kick things off, I'll ask each panelist to provide a brief opening statement on the importance of sustainable IT framework. So panelists, let's keep it very, very short. Let's start with Manoj.
Thanks for having me, first of all, Niladri and Shulbi. Very happy to be here. I think it's the need of the hour, just very simply put, a computer if runs 365 days non-stop, we need about 300 trees to offset that. So that's the scale that we're talking about, right? So, we can't just, be sitting at the fence. We need to jump in and do something about it.
Next, Naresh.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, right? I think what I like about the framework is very clearly the fact that it is bringing together a whole bunch of practices which are seeped in practical wisdom, right? Coming from years of experience from all the folks that have sort of gotten to create it. More importantly, I think the objectives are no longer outside of the business paradigm. These are becoming very central to how you run and operate as a business.
Niladri?
Yeah, I would give a couple of statistics. So if we look at it, IT is at 4% of the global energy consumption, and carbon footprint is quite significant. And if we look at organizations like bank, very recently you saw ABN AMRO's report, which says that on their overall carbon footprint, 40% comes from IT. I saw similar comments from somebody else who said that in the insurance sector, his organization is having around 30%. I'm still sure that this 40 and 30% is not well captured figures. So it will be more, not less. So it is important that all of us start looking at even the IT aspect of it and start helping achieve what the government, what the countries are trying to achieve, talking about in the COP28s and other COPs throughout the world. But unfortunately, we don't see that IT part being talked much. So we being in the IT and India being the second largest IT provider, service provider, practitioners, second largest practitioners of IT, I think we should lead the way in practicing sustainable IT.
Nice. Matt?
Thank you for having me. I think that the framework is important because it really helps to implement and ground the Sustainable IT Manifesto and to present a way in which that the manifesto can be concretely realized.
Great. So now that we understand the importance of sustainable IT framework, let's understand from Dr. Niladri the framework created by Green Computing Foundation. So Niladri, please briefly explain the framework for us.
Yeah, let me quickly get into showing the framework so that people can look at it and see what it is. So there are multiple components. The main area is the objectives. So we are calling it RICAW as of now. These are the areas that every IT organization has to look at. It's not just one part, only infrastructure or only calculation of carbon footprint. We need to look at actually reducing emission in infrastructure. We need to look at increasing energy efficiency and reduce the rework. We need to increase, need to bring in the circularity in IT assets. We need to have proper e-waste removal, or what we call the ITAD, the IT asset disposition at the end of life cycle, and also wastewater reduction, because there's a huge amount of wastewater that happens in the cooling. If you know that the Kansas Center where ChatGPT's models are trained, a per day Microsoft's that center is drinking around 700,000 liters of water per day, which is huge. And it is affecting the nearby water scenario, so which is not good. The second aspect that we need to look at is it has to be from in the entire life cycle, not just one part of it. So starting from the customer need to the customer value, in the entire process, we have to practice sustainable IT. That's why I've put this. Even you can equate this particular aspect as the Gartner's service value delivery platform part of it, or even in a simple terms, you can look at it at the entire CI/CD pipeline. There are some overarching guidelines, like we have to think in terms of long-term benefits and not short-term objectives, short-term gains rather. We have to look at long-term benefits, because to practice sustainability, there might be some additional cost which might come up, but down the line, it helps overall. We need to change policies, and that is not just IT policies, but it can be finance policies, it can be procurement. Various policies needs to look at cybersecurity policies, all needs to be looked at and changed to bring in the sustainability aspect. And finally, to bring in sustainability, to practice sustainability, we need to innovate. And with innovation comes improvement. So there has to be a continuous innovation and improvement. So if we look at the practices, what we need to do is we need to look at infrastructure procurement in a different manner. We need to bring in the collaboration and partnership. This is very important because no organization, or very few handful of organizations, actually work with on their own. They work with service providers. So that collaboration and partnership is required. Even the vendors, everybody. We need to bring in the traceability of scope 3 emission, because IT will typically be more scope 3 for most of the organizations, a little bit of scope 2 also. Software tools and architecture, we have to change that aspect to bring in the sustainability, efficient software development and efficient operations, IT asset disposition, as we mentioned, software observability from the sustainability point of view, and efficient data management, because data is the big thing in sustainability. One, it creates a lot of carbon footprint, and number two, it is effective data. Efficient data is what is going to help us even to be more sustainable. Now, how do we implement this? We go through the process of awareness, consciousness, and then execution of what we want to do to improve. And all this is guardrailed by the 12 sustainable IT manifesto points. So if you look at each of the point, all ultimately boils down to whatever we are doing in the framework ultimately helps us meeting this sustainable IT.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Niladri, for explaining this. The framework looks encompassing almost all the aspects from end to end. So leadership plays a crucial role in influencing organizational culture. So I would like to ask you, Manoj, that how as a leader would you adopt the framework in an organization?
Sure. Thanks, Surbhi. And before I get into the implementation, thanks, Dr. Niladri, first of all, for starting the Green Computing Foundation and bringing such a complex topic onto a single piece of paper. Very easy to comprehend, and one can kind of go over this very, very quickly. I think more and more leaders need to come to the table to be aware of this, be kind of sponsor of such initiative. So I think in terms of how will you go about it, in my opinion, Dr. Niladri covered most of it, but the things that I think are important in a torn from the top. As I said, leadership is very, very important. Influencing needs to come from there. Unfortunately, our schools or colleges don't teach, the green computing yet, right? So this is our generation, which is sort of we're learning it as we go, and it is our responsibility that we create the awareness first of all. It has to be part of our everyday language. It can't be like one-off, stand on on the stage and speak about it once and then forget it, right? It has to be your everyday language. How do you act, how do you make decisions? It has to be part of that. I think setting up certain goals, that kind of gives you some guidance where you're trying to go, and tracking, and as well as metrics. I'm a big fan, especially coming from the DevOps background. I'm a big fan of metrics. So having some metrics definitely will help. Two other key things, and again, I'll go back to the manifesto and and the organization. As I said, we are not trained for this, right? There are no courses in the formal courses for these things, at least in the colleges, at least the education that we had. So partnerships with Green Computing Foundation, Nextintro, those become very, very important, right? And the second part is the community, right? Both internal and external, right? As I said, we are all learning. I watch one video, I learn something. Where do I discuss? Where do I do myth busting? And similarly, how do I learn from the outside, other leaders from the different organizations? So I think those are very, very key aspects in terms of taking it further and far from here. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Manoj. Very well outlined. So I would like to ask Sanjay a question, but since Sanjay has not joined, I'm reserving that question for the later part. Let me come to Naresh. So tools and technologies are integral to any IT initiative. So Naresh, you tell me, how does the DevSecOps and SRE tools helps in adoption of this sustainable IT framework?
Yeah. So I would think of the question in not just the tools, right, but also the practices, because those will lead the tools, right? So when I'm saying tools, right, I think it is practices and tools. So they play a significant role, clearly DevSecOps and SRE, right? Both practices and tools. It actually allows organizations to proactively address a lot of the sustainability concerns and things that sort of Niladri outlined as part of the framework, right? A lot of those as part of the framework, right, in terms of reducing energy consumption, minimizing waste, contributing a lot more to being sort of environmentally friendly, and the larger sustainable IT ecosystem, right, which is beyond the four walls of your company, right? It is all the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, right? So everything in your ecosystem in a way. So if I were to sort of think of DevSecOps and SRE practices and tools, right, there are a few things come to my mind immediately, right? One, very clearly, in the context of, say, Infosys, right, we sort of had to build this out in the form of an Infosys DevSecOps platform or the SRE platform that we built. Primarily because what we felt is, one, we had to customize things to our way of doing business. And second, the part that sort of, covered, right, in terms of the metrics and the analysis, right, analytics. So first thing that comes to my mind is our ability to drive continuous monitoring and assessment. And with the DevSecOps tooling practices, SRE tooling practices that we have the ability to actually ensure that you can continuously assess the impact of your software, your product, right, your infrastructure changes and things like that, right? And by tracking this at the most granular level, your ability to actually then identify areas for improvement, optimize them, right, goes up significantly. So that's the first thing, ability to continuously monitor and assess. The second thing that comes to my mind is driving automation, right? Now, when I say driving automation, essentially look at energy intensive manual activities, tasks, right, that happen in the value chain. Now, with this tooling, you have the ability to actually look at efficient code deployment, resource allocation, etc., right, which can lead to reduced energy consumption. That's again, right, going and sort of touching a large part of the framework, right? The third aspect is driving larger security compliance, right? And this is critical because you could have vulnerabilities, you could have insecure data handling and kinds of things which could lead to excessive energy usage if they are not addressed, right? And these tools actually bubble these up very efficiently, very effectively. So addressing these, right, one is the compliance aspect, but also, sort of driving down the excessive use of energy across, right? Optimization of resources. In our case, right, we actually very clearly map a dollar value to how much are you actually spending on a deployment, right? How can you optimize? Where do you need to shut down stuff, right? Where do you need to bring down VMs? Where your pods are not very efficiently run? We actually show it in the form of dollars, right? And resource optimization then becomes that much more easier. So it can actually help you analyze the utilization of resources more effectively. It can suggest optimization strategies. You can then use it to drive consumption of energy in the data center, cloud environments, reducing energy waste, right? You could have over-provisioned stuff, right? You don't want it under-provisioned as well, right? So how do you strike that balance? So resource optimization becomes a very critical area, and these tools actually help. Then, a lot of times, right, a lot of effort is spent in recovery. And when we talk about reliability, when we talk about DevSecOps, our ability to minimize downtime, loss of data, right, securing your transactions, right, ensuring that you are in some ways preventing all these resource-intensive recovery efforts, that can be very detrimental to something like sustainability goals that we spoke about, right? So, how do you drive quick resolution and things like that, right? So, larger response recovery, right? Those aspects very clearly the tools are able to handle. And then finally, right, the overall cloud optimization, correct? And this could be on-prem, this could be hybrid cloud, this could be a mix of things, right? Public, private, whatever you are dealing with. So your data center efficiency and then the cloud resource management, right? So in my case, right, the DevSecOps SRE tooling is actually helping us through these dimensions, right? Starting from the continuous monitoring, analysis, right, to down to your infrastructure, right, data center, cloud resource management, and everything in between.
Wow, thanks, Naresh. This is so interesting. So I think we have all the arms and ammunitions with us. We need to learn how to utilize them in a better way, and that can help in becoming more sustainable. So that's an eye-opener. Thank you. So an interesting part I noticed in the framework is Sustainable IT Manifesto. And manifestos are often created to propose an alternative vision or set of actions to bring about the change. So Matt, would you please tell us how does the Sustainable IT framework cover the Sustainable IT Manifesto?
Certainly. The framework for implementing the Sustainable IT Manifesto is grounded in 3 core pillars. First off, awareness. We need to be aware that there are problems in the current IT practices, and then understand that there are sustainable alternatives. it's not just enough to be aware, but we need to have consciousness. So we need to actively identify areas for improvement within IT practices. And then once we are aware and conscious of them, then we can via enablement and empowerment, implement changes to foster a more sustainable IT environment. Together, all three of those build a foundation for implementing the manifesto. And the manifesto outlines specific practices and principles that promote sustainability. The framework, with its overarching guidelines and detailed practices and principles, provides a roadmap. It's not just enough to have the vision. We need to be able to bring the vision to life. So additionally, the framework addresses some of the challenges to the acceptance and implementation of the manifesto. For one, balancing costs and sustainability. The challenge of costs and sustainability is addressed through incremental improvements and a focus on long-term benefits. Additionally, there are trade-offs in performance versus sustainability. The conflict is managed by improving energy efficiency, minimizing the rework, and continuous innovation. We also have issues of market acceptance, and this can be alleviated by increasing awareness and consciousness about sustainability issues. And then we can influence consumer behavior towards accepting sustainable IT solutions. People in general want to do the right thing, but if they're not aware of how they can impact the world and how that they can play a role in making things more sustainable, then they aren't going to really understand why things might in the short term cost a little bit more. Additionally, the manifesto has the need to be able to align with industry standards. The manifesto and framework guide the establishment of sustainable principles and practices in the industry, promoting a unified approach. It also supports continuous learning and adaptation. We need to be able to improve our processes, not just to have them set in stone. And last but not least, transparent reporting. The challenge of transparency is addressed by practices like software observability and the monitor and improve phase in value stream mapping, ensuring that we have an open disclosure of our sustainability metrics. And as the metrics are made transparent, people are going to be more open to understanding why there is value in the framework and why it is important to be implemented. So in summary, the framework provides a structured approach. It's not just enough to have a dream, but we need to be able to address challenges through specific practices and an emphasis on continuous improvement and industry collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, absolutely, the Sustainable IT Manifesto you have created at a very right time when it is the need of the hour, and organizations require a guiding principle to, move forward towards practicing sustainable IT. Thank you so much. Welcome, Sanjay. Thanks, you have joined. Before I move ahead, let me go back to your question, which I had reserved. So I was going to ask Niladri the next question, but before Niladri, good that you joined. So the intersection of sustainable IT and cloud computing is a crucial aspect in the modern technology landscape. Naresh had highlighted in one of his points. So Sanjay, I would like you to give example of how this framework can be practically implemented in a cloud environment.
Yeah, so I think, as we all know, first of all, thank you for having me here. I think this is a great initiative, and this is very much need of the hour, given that the tech is becoming the backbone for almost everything that we can think of. And the dependency or infrastructure is going high day by day, right? And with the recent ChatGPT, little over a year old now, the need for compute has gone up significantly, and more adoption of ChatGPT and Gen AI, I think it is going to go up significantly anyway, right? And more kind of exponentially. I mean, some of the report says that 5 years down the line, the footprint in the cloud for the infrastructure needs is going to go up significantly because of some of the recent things like ChatGPT, Gen AI, and all that. So I think cloud, plays a very critical role for the successful technology and adoption of technology. And since we are talking about the infrastructure, that emits a lot of CO2, right? So I think, there is definitely a need, one, to have, how do we, one, minimize, if at all there is a possibility, but that seems not so much possible, right? Maybe a little bit of optimization can be done. But what else can be done from the cloud perspective, whether it is the application that we run on the cloud infrastructure or the overall footprint that we have? So one is, I think the infrastructure needs to become more efficient, more optimized to run the larger workloads, right? As I said, because of some of the recent developments like ChatGPT, the footprint is going to go up. So how do we optimize so that if we can, without exponentially increasing the footprint, we can run those workloads in more efficient manner? And I think the cloud providers, or as such, cloud plays a very, very critical role where, what if, for example, if I say submit my requirement that, hey, here is my footprint requirement, or here is my compute requirement, but it gives me that, hey, here is how much the carbon emission that this is going to give, right, to the environment. By just having that awareness, maybe there is going to be a lot of discipline that we may all adopt to, and then we may probably optimize that, hey, with this footprint, this is how much the carbon it is going to emit. So let me optimize maybe the workload, let me optimize my application so that I can reduce the overall infrastructure and reduce the overall carbon footprint. So that's my kind of response to your question, Surbhi.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. That's absolutely, great to know that these things are doable, and adjusting workloads and all can help in making in creating resource efficiency and reducing the energy which goes in computing. So good to know that. Thank you so much. So next question is to Niladri. So the integration of sustainable IT framework into business practices can be a strategic approach to achieving holistic sustainability. So Dr. Niladri, you please tell us, how does the sustainable IT framework helps in making the business more sustainable?
Sure. So a lot of the points that has been talked about, actually, it's more like a summation is what my question comes to me. So the first thing is the change of the mindset. When we are looking at only the cost, the challenge is that we start thinking short term, but we have to think long term in terms of the long term benefit and not the short term gains, which necessarily means that we are thinking in terms of how are we going to address a sustainable digital transformation rather than a digital transformation. We know that digital transformation will be there, but how are we going to do it? So as Naresh had mentioned, Manoj has mentioned that DevOps, DevSecOps. So if you look at it, we are talking about what Adrian Cockcroft has coined, the DevSecOps. We have to practice that. The point is that when we are looking at a new initiative, a digital transformation initiative, we have to also have the key parameters or KPIs that how sustainable is that? Even at the time of evaluating, like in a portfolio management, when you are deciding what needs to be done, sustainability has to be one element. I would take one example, which I saw today itself in one of the posts, that everybody is talking about AI, right? Everybody is going to be doing AI in some form or the other. And it is interesting that somebody mentions that AI is going to melt away. AI is not going to be there in the forefront at all. AI is going to be in each of our activities, right? The point is, how are we doing it is important. For example, does every organization, for that matter, even if you look at a service provider, does the service provider need to create LLM models for each and every project that they are doing? No. So the question comes is how, when you start thinking from sustainability point of view, you start looking at how can we share the LLM models? That way, the overall need for your infrastructure, the overall need, see, ultimately, cloud or no cloud, there is a material behind it. There are physical servers behind it. There are physical data centers behind it. So if we start sharing the same LLM model, then obviously it can be used by many, and we don't need that much of duplication. Similarly, when we look at data, if we do proper rationalization of or portfolio rationalization and we identify the duplicates of the data, we should be able to make the data more concrete, more crisp, and that way your AI also will be able to perform better with lesser effort, which means lesser energy consumption and carbon footprint. So what is happening is business starts looking at sustainability. Business even simply looks at reducing rework, simply looks at areas like that there should not be a failure in the production. We know that if a production failure happens, recovering it back is a huge effort. But if we can stop that, and that's where proper actual practice of DevOps, SRE actually helps. Now, for example, if you look at even the pipelines, everybody would like to create a new pipeline, but there has to be a standardization of pipelines because every pipeline is having energy consumption, having carbon footprint. But if we get into that proper usage of platform engineering, where we standardize on the pipelines that is required, and that pipeline can be used by multiple projects or multiple teams or multiple value streams, as you call it, obviously then you are more sustainable, but you are also being efficient enough to do things. But one point that I would like to also mention here is sustainability means that we should be able to do what we want to do, which will be beneficial for us, which requires us to understand the domain, which requires us to understand the technology landscape. And here there is a small challenge because we have to have our developers, our practitioners, to go back to that kind of a development which we started. Most probably the people who doesn't have hair and the people who has white hairs or gray hairs are the people who will understand. We have to go back to our old ways of working, like the C and C++. I'm not talking about the specific language, but how we used to do it, where we knew that how the system is going to perform and we could bend it to do it what we want. A low code, no code is not going to allow that. So we have to have some set of people who are going to address that part of the things. So that way also our efficiency will increase. Our reuse will be increasing, right? And our efficient coding, energy efficient coding is going to happen, which again will reduce the overall cost of doing things, right? So I think that way the whole business becomes more resilient, less outages, and much more efficient and hence more cheaper. I would say that's how it is going to work.
So, Dr. Niladri, you are trying to tell two things. One is that it requires a mindset shift, and second is going back to the roots.
Yeah.
And that is why maybe it is so challenging today. So, yeah, because we, it is being said that implementing sustainable IT practices are challenging. And so I would like to ask Sanjay again. I mean, what, in your opinion, are the key challenges that organizations face while adopting a sustainable IT framework?
I think number one thing is even the awareness, right? I think we are in very, very early stage, right? A lot of people, a lot of organizations today do not even know what's the overall impact or negative impact that every individual, every organization is creating, right? So I think that's number one thing. Second thing is about, I think, even awareness about what can be done to improve the situation. So I think if first one happens, probably the second one will happen. It may not happen full-fledged, but I think people will get into the second one, if they know that what is the carbon footprint that they're, leaving behind. So I think these are two things that comes to my mind.
Okay. So now let's talk a little about innovation. Okay, innovation is crucial in the IT sector. I mean, when we are talking of IT, we cannot leave that term aside. So Manoj, you tell us that what changes do you think are required in the IT processes to overcome the challenges to adopt the sustainable IT framework?
Yeah, sure. To be honest, a lot has already been covered. At the risk of repeating myself, Dr. Niladri covered quite a lot. Sanjay just did as well when he was talking about the cloud. I'll actually start by, again, the leadership, right? Is it, do we have, the mission statement, vision statement that is aligned with the manifesto, or let's say, the carbon footprint, right? What are our OKRs? It probably should start from that point of view. Awareness absolutely is the key, right? I think manifesto has to be part of every decision making. Any new funding that is coming, it should clearly state what is going to be the carbon footprint of this. In my career, I've faced a situation where a business process was, we were spending more money and generating more carbon footprint than it was giving us the profits for, right? So, how do we make those decisions? It has to be part of that. Large and complex organizations especially have an issue where, we start the work but not finish the work, right? So for example, you're trying to replace a system A with a system B, which is newer, faster, more resilient, more, produces less carbon. But in the end, the money runs out and you don't end up killing the system A, which you were meant to do, right? So the result is, there are two systems now running, doing the same thing and generating double the carbon footprint. So to be honest, innovation in this field is really simple. I don't think we need, new machines, new tools. It is, as Niladri said, going back to our roots, let's finish the work. Reusability, right? All of us are building software to be reused, but are we reusing, right? We call, reusable patterns, but in my experience, I've seen everybody is creating patterns that nobody is using, right? So we end up creating, APIs is the another example. How many duplicate APIs we end up creating and not reusing, right? So I think I'll say that, we need to kind of redefine the innovation in this context and not say, we need a fancy new shiny thing out of the box and, play with it. We need to dust off what we already have. It's very good. Go back to our roots and, just demonstrate the right behavior. Last but not the least, actually, identify those right behaviors and reward them. That's my opinion.
Great, thanks. Niladri, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I wanted to just give an example. I was talking to somebody in a payment gateway scenario, and what they are thinking of doing is for each of the payment gateway transaction, they want to calculate the carbon cost of each of the transaction. And that way, they want to see how to reduce that carbon cost of each payment gateway transaction. And it's really good to see people thinking now in these lines.
Right. So next question is to Naresh. So Naresh, do you see any gap in DevSecOps and SRE tools in the enablement of sustainable IT framework? And if yes, what are those and how can we overcome those gaps?
Yeah, thanks, Surbi. I do see, right? And, some of it we had to solve, like I was saying earlier, right? By building our own platforms and tools and whatnot. Because we started our journey way back in 2008 as a company, right, at Infosys. And in 2011, right, we actually made a voluntary sort of commitment saying, we will be carbon neutral. And by 2020, we actually became carbon neutral. And again, on those three clear pillars that we defined, saying we will look at energy efficiency to reduce emissions, will bring in renewable energy to avoid emissions, and then whatever is the residual emissions, right, can we do carbon offsetting to mitigate whatever is remaining. So we run one of the most energy efficient campuses in the world. Our per capita electricity consumption we brought down by 55% over the past decade or so. Almost 45% of our electricity actually is coming from renewable energy sources, right? So all of this, right, has led to sort of we in some ways requiring to innovate, right? Because you can't get here without doing some of these things. But challenges, yes, very clearly in terms of the DevSecOps and SRE tooling. One, I think a lot of times, right, the sustainability metrics, the understanding of those metrics, right, the ability to integrate them, right, isn't there, right? Because these tools are designed by virtue of what they are for doing these other metrics, right? Reliability, security, and things like that. But they're not designed for sustainability metrics, right? So, we had to actually do some workarounds to sort of get them to measure some of this, right? So, second, how do you validate some of this, right? So the ability to actually validate, in some ways, test, right? Just the way you test for the DevSecOps related things, right? Or performance testing or other things, right? Security testing or things like that. How do you test when you're actually integrating these metrics, right? So in your DevSecOps and SRE ecosystem. Then automation, right? So typically you'll find that, a comprehensive sort of automation framework doesn't exist today, right? So in our case, we had to create one, right, with the automation maturity model and whatnot. And then you sort of bring in some of these elements of monitoring, reporting, optimization of resources, right? Things like that into it. Then see the focus on, the architecture design, because that's where the decisions are getting made, right? You can measure it at a later point, but then, it may be too late, right? Too much water would have flown under the bridge. So focus on sustainable architecture becomes very critical. And that again, right, the tools typically do not do a good job of doing this, right? At a code level, we can look at indices. But if you go back to architecture design, that's where a lot of the decisions are happened, right? Which are then manifesting in whatever good, bad that happens later. A lot of the compliance and reporting, right? So there are no standards around some of this, right? Which are only emerging now. And that's why one of the things I like about these frameworks is that, they can actually bring in that standardization, which is required in the industry. Integration, which is not necessarily a sustainability issue, but a general issue when you are trying to sort of bring together data matrices from across the value chain, right? So integration becomes a challenge. And then, things like your optimization, right? How do you look at your cloud sustainability insights, right? For example, today, I don't think there is enough clarity about the cloud services that we consume, right? What is the environmental impact of some of those services, right? It's not very clear. So if there is more transparency around this, right, it would help, because we are still having some of this is either as a complete black box or a gray box, right? So that lack of, sort of insights into the cloud services and things like that, right? So those are challenges. And I think in general, if I look at it, right, most of our measurements are focused on the short term, correct? And there is a clear need, in my view, to sort of have a balance of the short term and the long term. And that's what we did successfully in the company, because we started the journey way back in 2008, but we had this long-term vision that we will become carbon neutral by so and so time. And then we started developing those capabilities within, and then started measuring this, right, around how do we look at both a balance of short-term and medium-term in terms of the sustainability impact.
Right. So I think definitely this framework will act as a guideline, and going forward together we can look at working, how to mitigate these challenges and do something better. And that is what the idea of Green Computing Foundation is, to, work in these areas and enable the organizations to do better work. So sustainability is a global concern. So my last question is for Matt. How can the IT industry foster international collaboration to address effective adoption of sustainable IT manifesto and sustainable IT framework? I think we cannot hear you, Matt.
Yep. Sorry about that. I believe that this is a very important topic because it's not as if there are walls that surround each country and isolate each country. It's a global problem. And I think that there are several strategic approaches that we can use in order to work together and increase collaboration and awareness. The first would be global forums and conferences that are focused on sustainable IT practices. This will help with knowledge sharing and collaboration. They can serve as platforms for discussing challenges, sharing best practices, and developing unified strategies for sustainable IT. We also need to have cross-border partnerships. We need to have people, companies, governments, and NGOs across different countries working together to exchange ideas, resources, best practices, etc. The Sustainable IT Framework is a great step in this direction. It can also work on joint projects, research, and development initiatives. Additionally, and this has been said before, that so many people are working in a vacuum and doing their own thing. By working together as a global people, we can standardize our practices. We don't have to keep reinventing the wheels. We don't need duplication. We can also set up international standards and guidelines that align with the manifesto's principles, as well as the practice of the framework, so that we can have consistency and compatibility. Also, educational and training programs. This is very important. It goes back to the 3 pillars. We need to be aware, we need to be conscious, and then we can enable. We also can do shared research and development. There's no reason why we can't work together. Too much has been done for too many years in a vacuum, in isolated silos. So we need to tear down the silos. And we can also have policy advocacy and government engagement. We need to work with policymakers and governments. And this isn't just our local governments. We also need to improve international organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and others. And finally, we can leverage our abilities to have public awareness campaigns. It can be through social media. It can be through videos such as this one. But this is fostering the awareness. And finally, we can work together on open source communities. So this goes back to not reinventing the wheels, having shared processes, having shared tools that are used, and we can pool our expertise and resources. So by working together, we can make a more sustainable IT practice and have a better way of working towards the future together. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Absolutely can't agree more. The journey towards sustainability is a collective effort, and we all play an important role in shaping a more sustainable future. So on this note, I would like to thank you, our distinguished panelists, for sharing your valuable insights today. We hope this discussion has provided our audience with a deeper understanding of sustainable IT framework. Now, this one is for the viewers. Looking towards the future, what do you envision as the future trends and developments in sustainable IT framework? Share your thoughts, comments, suggestions to us at Green Computing Foundation. Visit us on our website and follow us on our LinkedIn page. Thanks for watching.